Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos that I'm doing on mission design in game design, missions sometimes called quests. And this one is one of a pair that I'm doing about some of the drivers that you can use to as a drive for your thinking process as you're designing missions. And in this one, I'm going to talk about using the gameplay considerations to drive your mission design. And this is one of a pair with the one that came before it, which is about using story to drive your mission design. I've not actually got a huge amount to say here, but there are some specific things that come through from your gameplay that you might want to be thinking about as you're designing your missions. So that was rule 6, and at heart, rule 6 says that if you've got a tension at any point in your design between the needs of the gameplay and the needs of any other aspects of the game, maybe the accuracy or the history or anything like that, that in my opinion, the gameplay should trump any other aspects. But these things obviously need to be taken in some kind of balance. So as I said, we're going to have a quick look at some of the gameplay aspects that might drive the needs for your mission design quite quickly. So often games have a tutorial period at the start of the game, and these days often the tutorial is effectively done through missions as you learn. And in fact, all the way through your game, you might have learning through playing. And so you need to be thinking about how the player is going to learn to play the game, how they're going to learn new aspects of the game. This is not necessarily just in the tutorial phase. Also, there might be stuff that you unlock through the game, and as you're unlocking things, this might be new capabilities, but also new areas, new equipment, all sorts of things you can unlock. And again, doing it through missions is a good way to do things, because this then ties that unlocking in as a reward. I'm going to do another video on rewards coming up in this series. There's also a couple of elements of progression that you might want to think about. So character progression, again, it's kind of like unlocking, but missions often they're not exclusive to RPGs, but RPGs often have this. I think always, no, maybe that's a bit too strong, have this idea of character progression where your character capabilities improve as you go through the game, and tying in your missions to that unlocking and the character progression can be something that you want to do. Similarly, the game progression, of course, very strongly story-driven games or mission-driven games, the concept is that as you go through the game, the missions, when you get to the end of the missions, that's effectively the end of the game. So you progress through the game as you go. And if you want to have any kind of flow to your game, and you probably should do, thinking about the timeline and how the player goes through, then that might have some effect on what missions you put where in your game in the flow. There's another video that I've done earlier about linearity and different flows through games. So if you want to know more about that, go and look at that. It's a very common thing for missions to increase in difficulty as they go through the game. So that's another consideration you might want to bear in mind. And this brings us neatly to another of my gameplay rules. Yeah, so you need to keep that balance working, and the stakes need to be upped as you go through the game. The challenge increases as you go through. This is a normal, accepted progress through games. And as a consequence, the reward in particular should keep increasing as you go through. Okay, so I think the last thing specifically I want to talk about for the using gameplay to drive missions is this thought of mixing it up. And So you might want to have a variety of missions as you go through. In terms of the pace of the missions, so some missions are more potentially more frantic, some missions might be more laid back and relaxed, and this just gives me an excuse for a nice relaxed picture from my time in Portia. And the other way that you might want to mix it up is just variety in the challenge and the things that you're asking the player to do. As I said at the beginning, I think at least twice this video is part of a pair, which is to do with different drivers in designing missions, the gameplay side and the story side. And it's kind of been presented by me as if these two things are pulling in different directions, and there is some sort of truth to that. But I did want to talk just a little bit at the end here about this tension. Incidentally, there are people who study games, and there are two major camps of people who study games, which are the Narratology group and the Ludology group. And this kind of nicely fits and aligns to these, because the Narratology group say it's all about stories, and the Ludology group say, well, it's all about the game structure. And this is basically the tension between story and gameplay. I think that the answer to this is that really you want both. And you want to consider both as you're designing your game. So obviously it does depend on the kind of game that you're doing and the situation. If you've got a puzzle game, the story elements might be much weaker or non-existent. But for AAA type games, it's now very unusual for a game not to have very strong story elements in it. And over recent years, story has become increasingly important in games. It is possible to overemphasize one side over the other. So there are some games where the story takes the overriding role and the gameplay takes a backseat, and there are some where it's the other way around and the story just doesn't cut it. I maintain that your best game is probably going to happen if you give due consideration to both of these things. And this isn't, I think, actually a problem, because where you have these kind of creative tensions, that tends to breed creativity. And limitations and anything like this tends to fuel forwards creative aspects in creative people. So make them work together. That's my advice. If you can at all, where you've got tensions, you've got to work out, which priority is more important. So yes, remember, it's about the player experience. And as you're designing this and as you're reconciling these tensions, you've got to think about what is the player experiencing and how do I make this the best, most engaging experience for my player. So we've been talking about missions, and I'm coming to the end. This just gives me an excuse to show a screenshot from one of my favourite missions of recent times, which is from Grand Theft Auto 5. It's the very controversial Torture mission. And I think in terms of gameplay and emotional content in a mission, this one is very much a high point to aspire towards. You can't have these kind of points every single mission in your game, but you might want to think about having some stuff in your game that really does challenge the player, not just in terms of gameplay, but in terms of the emotional content as well. Anyway, that's it from me for now.